Growing up playing video games, something I noticed is that having extra options was never a downside to a legend or champion's viability. Sure, maybe having more moves necessitates a steeper learning curve or having to press more buttons, but the theoretical viability of characters with more options always ended up with them higher up on the tier list, especially compared to those who didn't. And intuitively, this kind of makes sense. After all, having the option to dash or jump over walls or to spam a projectile creates opportunities where none previously existed. It just logically follows that having more options will always be better, right? And having less options will always be worse? Crazy enough, this isn't always the case. Consider the following thought experiment called Parfit's hitchhiker. The paradox is as follows. Suppose you're an ideal selfish rational agent. You're stranded in the middle of nowhere, say a desert. Just when you feel despair creeping in, a selfish, ideally game-theoretical motorcyclist pulls up next to you who can perfectly tell how honest you are. Seeing your predicament, the driver asks, "If I let you hitch a ride on my motorcycle, will you pay me $1,000 once we get to the town's ATM machine? If you can honestly answer yes, I'll take you in." You, not wanting to be left in such a precarious spot, answer, "Yes, of course." However, the driver, realizing you have no reason to pay them once you arrive in town, says, "You're lying," and drives off, leaving you stranded. If you want to assume that the driver would still help out a person if their net utility was 0, maybe the combined weight of both people would lower the mileage per gallon or something. But backtracking to the topic, there are a few key perspectives that game theorists have come up with to explain the paradox. First is causal decision theory. This is when people evaluate and make choices based on the causal effects of the options presented. In this case, the fact that you were saved from the desert has no impact on the consequences of the options you have in the town. You either lose $1,000 or you pay nothing. As a result, you can't answer honestly and the biker would never bring you home. Next comes evidential decision theory, when an agent chooses the action that provides the best evidential implications about what outcome it will likely experience, rather than focusing narrowly on the causal implications of that action. Unfortunately, the evidential decision theorist will also be stranded. Being in town means that paying and not paying correlate with being saved. So is it just doomed? Is there no way to make it home? Well, actually, not quite. The main accepted method is called functional decision theory. When deciding how to act, treat your decision as whatever the output of your decision-making process would be, and realize that other agents or situations can depend on that same algorithm and their predictions. Then, you pick the algorithm that does the best overall. In other words, we should adopt the mindset of, if I am rescued, I'll pay the driver. If we fully believe the premise that the driver can fully read if we're being honest, this creates a logical dependency between your being rescued and your paying afterwards, so the driver has the incentive to pick you up. But honestly, this whole paradox would be resolved if we didn't have the option to not pay the driver. Imagine if, the moment you got into town, the police would escort you to the ATM and make you withdraw $1,000. Knowing this, then the driver would be way more assured to pick you up, regardless of what decision theory you subscribe to. Speaking of subscribing, please do. Only a small fraction of people watching right now are actually subscribed, but I'd love for that percent to increase. Let's look at a more realistic example. Imagine two islands want to facilitate travel paths between them. Suppose on both islands, there exists a road that goes from the southwest end to the northeast end. Road traffic is obviously dependent on the number of cars on said road. With a few cars, transportation will be faster, but a huge jam could take way longer. Naively, let's say the road from A to B and from C to D both have travel times of k over 10 minutes, where k is the number of people who chose to take the road. For example, if 100 people decide to take the road, then the travel time of all of them is 10 minutes. However, the islands soon realize that roads aren't the only form of transport, and they still want to connect. Suppose there existed a ferry from A to C and also one from B to D. This ferry takes a constant 20-minute travel time, including on and off the ferry and so on. If we have a total of 200 travelers who all simultaneously leave from A, and all of them want to get to D, what would be the fastest way for a single traveler to arrive? Assume that all of these actors are independent but rational. To solve this problem, we can think of the concept of Nash equilibrium, where no player can gain anything by deviating from their current strategy, assuming that everybody else's strategy is constant. Here, the Nash equilibrium is for 100 people to go to the top route and 100 people to go to the bottom. To prove that it's a Nash equilibrium, let's analyze any individual if everybody else is playing this strategy. On their current route, they have a 20-minute constant alongside a road with 100 people on it, so their current travel time is 20 plus 100 divided by 10, which is 30 minutes. Meanwhile, if they alone switched while everybody else was a constant, they'd still have a 20-minute constant, but their travel time on the road would increase to 101 over 10, meaning their total travel time would increase to 30.1 minutes. So it seems like we've reached a happy equilibrium. No one would want to deviate from this strategy, so each person's total travel time will always be 30 minutes. Now let's see what happens when we add another option. Suppose that we add a superhighway from B to C. You can think of it as a teleporter if you want, but basically the idea is that any person who takes this path travels instantly from B to C. This seems like a really good option. After all, if it's a bad option, no one would take it. But if it's a good option, then it doesn't add any travel time, right? Well, let's analyze the scenario where everybody takes the path from A to B to C to D. This means that the total travel time for one individual is 200 divided by 10 plus 0 plus 200 divided by 10, which is 40 minutes. And we're going to argue that this is also a Nash equilibrium, meaning that nobody can gain anything from deviating their strategy. Why? Well, if someone did switch and decided not to take the superhighway, then they could either go from A to B to D, which takes 200 over 10 plus 20, which is 40 minutes, or from A to C to D, which takes 20 plus 200 over 10 minutes, which is equal to 40 minutes, meaning there isn't any incentive to switch. And there we have it. We've constructed a scenario where it's strictly more optimal to not have an option rather than to have it. This example we've been talking about is called Braess's paradox, and it's even seen in real-world scenarios like in London or Cambridge one-way roads. Braess's paradox is also just not connected to roads. There's other applications to communication networks, power grids, and supply chains. I think generally these types of problems are pretty similar to the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons describes scenarios where individuals acting in their own self-interest in the short term creates worse scenarios for everyone in the long run. The origin of the term was coined in the 19th century when it was observed that farmers sharing grazing pastures would overfeed their cows selfishly, without waiting for all the grass to regrow. As a result, the fields would eventually shrivel up, leaving all the farmers with a scarcity issue. Yet, with no overarching authority to dictate what to do, these farmers were unable to avoid this outcome. In every scenario so far, if all these actors simply communicated, then in theory they could always achieve this optimal total social welfare. But in the real world, this sort of communication is incredibly difficult to come by. And even if it is, it's also dependent on the internal belief mechanisms of everybody involved, kind of like we saw in Parfit's hitchhiker. Moreover, the lack of enforcement methods gives individual actors and incentives to cheat, bringing us right back to the problem of the tragedy of the commons in the first place. So oddly enough, it is possible for there to be situations where it is optimal to never have the option to do something to begin with, even though conventional wisdom says that more options is always better due to higher flexibility. With Parfit's hitchhiker, it would be better for us to not have the option of not paying once we get to town. With Braess's paradox, it's obvious that sometimes adding a superhighway can actually make things worse. And with the tragedy of the commons, it would be optimal for everyone if no individual has the ability to cheat the system and overgraze. The intuition on why adding options can actually hurt is due to the nature of group decision making. Because of the fact that each individual is making their choice independently, this lack of coordination, along with the fixation of optimizing on the present, opens up the possibility of a worse equilibrium compared to other scenarios. I want to close this video by relating what we've talked about with something that I think is a pretty novel field, AI safety. Right now, there's a lot of talk about the AI race between ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and other small but quickly rising third parties. Right now, since countries like the United States are primarily run by old people who don't understand how this technology works, lobbyists and profit tend to drive policymaking. Consequently, this opens up extra options of investing without checkbacks, gathering training data with questionable means, and adding more and more parameters, all without regards to AI safety. If you're curious on why AI safety matters at all, I urge you to check out the YouTube channel called Silly Conversations. Note that this isn't a sponsorship or anything, I don't even know them, nor have I ever talked with them, but they make educational content in a really funny way, and I think the topic is really important. Link will be in the description along with resources as per usual. Otherwise, that's all from me. I really appreciate you watching. I've been reading comments consistently even if I can't respond, and I've been taking in feedback. Please let me know what you think of the new mic too. Sorry about the upload delay and also if I sound weird. I've been really sick recently, so that's probably why this video is delayed. But hopefully things will be back on schedule once I catch up. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.